Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Okay, so I have a book of short stories by Vladimir Nabokov, and I was starting to read a few of them, the English ones first, because I don't like reading books in translation, because you lose, at least not books that are very lyrical, very beautifully written, because you lose a lot of the beauty of the language in the translation, including Nabokov, brilliant as he is. Even his books that are translated from Russian or whatever are significantly less beautiful. So I wanted to mainly just read the English language short stories in this because they'll be way better than all the others. You know, because he's not a story guy, he's a lyricism, a beauty of language guy. That's what's good about Nabokov, right? Like Salman Rushdie. But so anyway, I was reading this short story called The Vane Sisters, and it says this. It says, Cynthia had a feeling that her dead sister was not altogether pleased with her, had discovered by now that she and I had conspired to break her romance, and so in order to disarm her shade, Cynthia reverted to a rather primitive type of sacrificial offering, tinged, however, with something of Sybil's humor, and began to send to Dee's business address at deliberately unfixed dates such trifles as snapshots of Sybil's tomb in a poor light, cuttings of her own hair, which was indistinguishable from Sybil's, a New England sectional map with an inked-in cross midway between two chaste towns to mark the spot where Dee and Sybil had stopped on October the 23rd in broad daylight at a lenient motel in a pink and brown forest, and twice a stuffed skunk. Being as a conversationalist more voluble than explicit, she never could describe in full the theory of intervenient auras that she had somehow evolved. Fundamentally, there was nothing particularly new about her private creed, since it presupposed a fairly conventional hereafter, a silent solarium of immortal souls, spliced with mortal antecedents, whose main recreation consisted of periodical hoverings over the dear quick. And I think quick means alive. I'm not sure, like, the quick and the dead, I assume that means the alive and the dead, so I assume quick means alive. The interesting point was a curious practical twist that Cynthia gave to her tame metaphysics. She was sure that her existence was influenced by all sorts of dead friends, each of whom took turns in directing her fate, much as if she were a stray kitten which a schoolgirl in passing gathers up and presses to her cheek and carefully puts down again near some suburban hedge to be stroked presently by another transient hand, or carried off to a world of doors by some hospitable lady. For a few hours, or for several days in a row, and sometimes recurrently in an irregular series, for months or years, anything that happened to Cynthia after a given person had died would be, she said, in the manner and mood of that person. The event might be extraordinary, changing the course of one's life, or it might be a string of minute incidents just sufficiently clear to stand out in relief against one's usual day, and then shading off into still vaguer trivia as the aura gradually faded. The influence might be good or bad. The main thing was that its source could be identified. It was like walking through a person's soul, she said. I tried to argue that she might not always be able to determine the exact source, since not everybody has a recognizable soul, that there are anonymous letters and Christmas presents which anybody might send, that in fact what Cynthia called a usual day might itself be a weak solution of mixed auras, or simply the routine shift of a humdrum guardian angel. And what about God? Did or did not people who would resent any omnipotent dictator on earth look forward to one in heaven? And wars. What a dreadful idea. Dead soldiers still fighting with living ones, or phantom armies trying to get at each other through the lives of crippled old men. But Cynthia was above generalities, as she was above logic. She was beyond logic. Ah, that's Paul, she would say when the soup spitefully boiled over, or, I guess good Betty Brown is dead, when she won a beautiful and very welcome vacuum cleaner in a charity lottery. And with Jamesian meanderings that exasperated my French mind, she would go back to a time when Betty and Paul had not yet departed, and tell me of the showers of well-meant but odd and quite unacceptable bounties, beginning with an old purse that contained a check for $3, which she picked up in the street, and of course returned to the aforesaid Betty Brown. This is where she first comes in a decrepit colored woman, hardly able to walk, and ending with an insulting proposal from an old beau of hers. This is where Paul comes in, to paint straight pictures of his house and family for a reasonable remuneration, all of which followed upon the demise of a certain Mrs. Page, a kindly but petty old party who had pestered her with bits of matter-of-fact advice since Cynthia had been a child. Sybil's personality, she said, had a rainbow edge as if a little out of focus. She said that Had I known Sybil better, I would have at once understood how Sybil-like was the aura of minor events which in spells had suffused her. Cynthia's existence after Sybil's suicide. Ever since they had lost their mother, they intended to give up their Boston home and move to New York, where Cynthia's paintings, they thought, would have a chance to be more widely admired. But the old home had clung to them with all its plush tentacles. Dead Sybil, however, had proceeded to separate the house from its view, a thing that affects fatally the sense of home. Right across the narrow street, a building project had come into loud, ugly, scaffolded life. A pair of familiar poplars died that spring, turning to blond skeletons. Workmen came and broke up the warm-colored, lovely old sidewalk that had a special violet sheen on wet April days and had echoed so memorably to the morning footsteps of museum-bound Mr. Lever, who upon retiring from business at 60 had devoted a full quarter of a century exclusively to the study of snails. And let's see here. Yeah, I think that was pretty much all of the part that I wanted to read. I mainly wanted to read that part about auras. Notice how, like, she gets this, like women are very feelings based, right? So she gets this feeling on a weird day because, feelings are like that. Like, even guys will have like an off day for no real good reason. They just feel way off. Like they get angry easy or they just feel depressed for no reason or whatever, right? So this being the case, like women are even more so that way. Like their moods fluctuate from minute to minute, day to day, second to second, month to month, whatever, right? So, when she doesn't, quote, feel like her normal self, she just chalks it up to, oh, that's so-and-so's, aura haunting me or whatever and influencing my mood today. And then, so she just, blithely like attributes it to the supernatural without even really caring whether it's true. She just feels like that could be true, so she just says, oh yeah, that's what's happening. And she doesn't really care whether it makes any sense or not, right? Because, like they said, he pointed out all these things, like, well, maybe your normal mood is really just a mix of all the, like, ghosts hanging around you, and it's several of them, and it's just a mix of those auras, and that's why you normally feel the way you normally feel, right? And other things, like, what about the soldiers and stuff, and all these other weird things, like, you could take that kind of belief system to its logical conclusion, and it becomes absurd, right? So he's pointing this out to her, but yet, Cynthia was above generalities, as she was beyond logic. Like, that's exactly how it is, right? Like, women say things, and then because they feel them, it must be true, right? Like, and then you point out, like, with data or logic or rationality or whatever else, you say, no, that can't be true because, or, okay, maybe it's true, but well then this must be true too. And it's clearly something that she would not agree with, but she doesn't really care. She's just like, well, I just think it's that way. Or just like, oh, you're just too much of a skeptic, or, well, things aren't so rigid. You can't just, generalize or extrapolate that way or whatever. She'll come up with some excuse for why your logical assessment of why what she's saying is absurd. She'll come up with some excuse for why what you're saying is itself, too strict, or just, you're just being a cynic or whatever. She'll just try to discount you in some way to where she can just keep on feeling the way she feels and keep holding this ridiculous belief system that she wants to believe. Right? She just believes what she wants to believe, and then anybody who points out how ridiculous that belief system is, she's just going to discount what they're saying and just be like, that can't be true, or I don't really care, I believe it, or that's all that matters, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So, like, this just is, I just thought that little part of that short story, which was much larger than that, well, I mean, not much larger, but it was, I don't know, I think it was 12 pages long or something, and that was only like 1.5 pages I read or something. Yeah, so that little excerpt, I thought, especially the part about the auras and stuff, I read a little bit before and a little bit after because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. I couldn't remember where it exactly began and ended, the part that I wanted to read to you, but my point was that I wanted to read that little part about the auras because I thought it was just such a perfect example of exactly how women are. Just following their feelings, holding ridiculous belief systems, how their feelings change so often, how you can point out how ridiculous their feelings are, or their belief system about their feelings, how ridiculous it is, and they won't listen to a word you say. It won't affect them, it won't make them not believe that ridiculous belief system at all, right? I mean, maybe it's, I don't even really think it's that different today. It's just not that way about spiritualism or religion. It's just that way now about things like feminism or whatever, right? Whatever else it is that they believe in blindly, that they've never really looked into, that they've never really thought through, that they just have a feeling about because of the decades of propaganda they've undergone. And so they just, no, it's just common sense that women should have the vote. It's like you say, well, why? Why? Prove it. Or What about this? The fact that women don't fight, so why should they have recourse to the substitute for fighting, which is voting? Or, the fact that women vote more liberal than men, or all these other things. You can bring up all these objections, and women will still say the same thing. Oh, you're just a sexist. That's ridiculous. You just don't know how women feel. Why shouldn't women are human beings too? Why shouldn't they be able to vote? It doesn't matter that they vote more liberal than men. It doesn't matter that they don't have to fight in wars. Women are different than men. Men should have to fight in wars, but women shouldn't. They won't listen to reason because they don't think that way. They think emotionally, not logically, right? So this is just the way it is. I thought this little excerpt from this short story is a perfect example of it, and so I just had to read it to you. And hopefully, someone got something out of this, or at least it reinforces what you already knew about women being this way. I'm not saying this is a totally original point or anything. I'm sure other people have done videos on probably not that little story, but they pointed out this same truth about female nature in their own videos. I'm sure they have. I don't know if I've seen any, but it's such an obvious truth. I'm sure tons of people have pointed it out. So I'm not claiming this is such an original video or anything, but I just felt compelled to make it. So maybe someone got something out of this. This has been Redshift. Hit the thumbs up button if you like this video. Hit the thumbs down button if you didn't. Peace trucks.